Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Blog Podcast. Today is Monday, February 4th, 2019. The Super Bowl is done. The NFL season is over. We're just going to get right into it. The Patriots defeat the Rams 13-3. Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, it's their sixth Super Bowl win together. This game was ugly, but it was competitive. A lot of good defense, obviously, but barely any offense. After a scoreless first quarter, the Patriots get on the board first with a 42-yard field goal to make it to 3-0. And then that was the score at halftime. Third quarter, the only score was a Greg Zuerlein 53-yarder to tie it up at 3 apiece. Fourth quarter, after a big reception by Rob Gronkowski, set the Patriots up at the 2-yard line as Sonny Michel runs it in with 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter to give the Patriots a 10-3 lead. Then the Rams drive and Stephon Gilmore picks off Jared Goff at the New England 4-yard line because that was pretty close. The Rams, very close. They came to potentially tying the game. And then Stephen Gostkowski put the game away, 41-yard field goal, 13-3. Rams put together a garbage time drive, but it ended in a missed kick. And if that kick had been made, then it would have been an onside kick attempt. You never know with those, but good for Tom Brady, good for Bill Belichick. Julian Edelman was the MVP. He had 10 receptions for 140 yards. New England closed as a 2.5-point favorite. The line did not go up to 3 like some people thought. By the way, Edelman had 141 yards on 140. Tom Brady, 21 of 35, 262 yards and an interception. Jared Goff, 19 of 38, 229 yards and a pick. Goff did not have his finest game. That brutal interception late. He had a lot of deer in the headlights look. He was nervous, and I think the moment was too big for him. I think he'll learn from this, and they'll move on. The Rams have a lot of guys that are going to be free agents. Let's see who they bring back. I believe their 2 starting cornerbacks are free agents in Talib and Peters. Brandon Cooks is a free agent. Let's see who they bring back. They'll certainly be a contender next year. So New England. And this was actually an unpredictable, but at the same time a somewhat predictable season. There are some teams that overachieved, some teams that have underachieved. The Patriots, don't forget, were somewhat of an underachiever this year. They went 11-5. That's a fine record, and won them the AFC East and the number 2 seed in the AFC. But they were 3-5 on the road. Probably should have been 4-4 because of that fluke Miami game. They probably should have been 12-4 and probably would have had home field advantage in the playoffs if not for the Miami play. But that doesn't matter. The Miami play didn't come back to haunt them as they made the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. Rams, phenomenal year 2 under Sean McVay. I thought McVay was exposed in the Super Bowl because he was outcoached by the GOAT, that is Bill Belichick. But I think McVay's going to learn from this. He's very young. Goff's also very young. Goff was in his 3rd year. I think Brady and Belichick return. Gronkowski, I think, retires, but not immediately. He's 29, but he's had so much injury and concussion problems, so I expect him to hang it up. Although I wouldn't be floored if he came back to try for another Super Bowl. And one more thing I want to hit on, I think they got it wrong with the Super Bowl MVP. I think that it should have been Stephon Gilmore because he made the biggest play of the game, which was that interception. And if he doesn't make that interception, maybe the Rams tie, and we're talking about Jared Goff winning his first ever Super Bowl, and same for Sean McVay. And then we're talking about Brady and Belichick dropping the 5-4 in the big game instead of improving to 6-3. I want to talk about futures for the Super Bowl next year. These are brought to you by FanDuel. I'm interested to see what FanDuel has out there. I'm probably not going to put down a future right now because I want to see who makes it through the offseason workouts healthy and training camp healthy, where free agents sign, who's traded, and whatnot. I'm going to go through the futures from FanDuel, and then I'll do my post-Super Bowl power rankings. And by the way, these post-Super Bowl power rankings I'm doing have nothing to do with what I think of each team going into next season, because you never know with injuries and free agency and whatnot. Here we go. Right now, according to FanDuel, the favorite to win Super Bowl 54 is the New England Patriots at 8-1. I saw another place, I believe Westgate had the Chiefs at 6-1, but according to my FanDuel, 8-1, New England's your favorite. At 9-1, you have the Chiefs and the Saints. At 11-1, you have the Rams. At 14-1, you have a couple teams. You have the Colts, the Chargers, and the Steelers. At 18-1, you have the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. 20-1, you have a bunch of different teams. Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, and Minnesota. 25-1, you have Houston, Seattle, and Dallas. At 30-1, you have Carolina. 35-1, you have Jacksonville and San Francisco. 40-1, Cleveland. 50-1, Detroit, New York Giants, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tennessee Titans. 60-1, Cincinnati. 70-1, Denver. 80-1, the Jets. 100-1, Miami, Oakland, Washington. 150-1, Arizona and Buffalo. So those are the futures. As we go into the offseason, I think a lot of those, like I said, are going to change because of free agent moves and trades. Like Pittsburgh at 14-1, I think's going to go down because I think they eventually move on from Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. And I think that a team like the Browns will move up because I think they'll make some moves to try to improve themselves. I think the Giants could potentially move up if they move on from Eli Manning and draft the new quarterback. I think that'll bring some optimism to their team. I think that Philadelphia can move up depending on what they do with Nick Foles. If Washington acquires a different quarterback, an upgrade over Alex Smith, even though Smith's hurt, I could see their odds going up. I could see, obviously, New England's odds going up because just from the Patriots fans and Patriot backers, just in general, because 8-1 is a good price for them right now. I could see the Rams moving up or moving down depending on how they do in the offseason and whatnot. And on to my power rankings. I'm going to go from 32-1, and I'm going to say whether I think this team had a successful season or a failure season. 32, the Arizona Cardinals, their season was a failure. Steve Wilkes was gone after 1 year. There's some speculation out there that they fired him because he's black. I'm not buying that. I think Wilkes was awful last year. Josh Rosen looks like a bust early on. That's why Cliff Kingsbury was hired. And if Josh Rosen makes a jump in year 2, that'll prove yet again that Steve Wilkes did not do the finest job. 31's the Oakland Raiders. They were terrible in year 1 under John Gruden. I expect them to go out and make some moves in free agency. I have news regarding them once these power rankings are done. Number 30 is the Buffalo Bills. Oh, by the way, Raiders season, I'd say a failure because there's a little expectation, big name coach, and they just didn't live up to the hype. The Buffalo Bills, this is a tough one for me. I know some people would say failure because they made the playoffs last season and didn't make it this year. But I'm going to spin it. I think they had a good year. Josh Allen looks like the right pick right now. He's shown signs of being a solid quarterback from years to come. This is all about Josh Allen for me. And when Josh Allen wasn't playing, this team was not very good other than the game they played at the Jets when Matt Barkley started. And speaking of the Jets, they're 29. I'd say their season's a failure. I don't think Sam Darnold lived up to the hype that Jets fans expected. Yes, he was injured. That was a part of it. And once he came back from injury, he played pretty well. He needs to make a big jump in year 2, or else that is going to make the Jets look a little bad. And if he doesn't have a better year than, let's say, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, or Lamar Jackson, because those are the quarterbacks picked after Darnold, then they're looking bad. But the Jets have some cap space. I think they're going to be in play for Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. They need to improve their offense. They need to improve both sides of the ball. Their defense isn't very good either. They have a new coaching staff, so that brings some optimism to the Jets. I'd say last year's a fail for them. 28th, the Miami Dolphins. I'd say this past season was, this is a tough one. I'm going to say a fail only because it cost the coach its job. No progress from Ryan Tannehill, even though he wasn't healthy most of the year. They stayed in the playoff hunt, but to me this was about Ryan Tannehill and his improvements and some other young players as well, but to me they showed no progress. 27 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I consider their season a failure too. Yeah, they were a projected last place team, but this is all about Jameis Winston. He did not show the improvement that people thought. Now, there was some speculation before they hired Bruce Arians that they could have potentially moved on from him, which I don't think they will. I think Arians wants to keep Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston's very talented, but I just don't think Dirk Cutter was the right coach for him. We'll see how he does under a better coach in Arians. 26 is the New York Giants. They're probably the biggest failure on this list so far. A lot of people are going to say that they already regret picking Saquon Barkley. That, to me, is not true because Saquon Barkley is a transcendent talent. I think the most transcendent, talented offensive player that's not a quarterback that came out in a very long time. And if you passed up a quarterback for Saquon Barkley, I think that's okay because of how talented Saquon Barkley is. This guy, I think, could be a future Hall of Famer if he stays healthy. I think he's the best running back in football already. And, yeah, the Giants' season to me is a failure, but to me it's more of a failure because the offensive line was not very good. Nate Solder, their big free agent acquisition, was a bust. Eli Manning proved to be washed. The should have taken a quarterback over Barkley crowd was proven right from a standpoint of Eli Manning, but not from a standpoint of how awesome Saquon Barkley was. There's obviously all the drama with Odell Beckham Jr., and I'm going to get to another team with wide receiver drama who had a big failure of a season. I think probably a bigger failure of a season than the Giants because a team I'm going to mention in a couple of minutes was a projected division winner and not the Giants. The Giants were projected. A lot of people had them as a second-place team before the year. I picked them to finish in third because I thought people were underselling Dallas. I was proven to be right. But I didn't think that Dallas was going to be a division champion and in the second round of the playoffs. That's where I was wrong about Dallas. 25 is the Washington Redskins. Their season's a failure because they thought they could have been a playoff team. They thought they had a good defense. They thought Alex Smith was going to come in and win football games, but no, he was a disappointment, and then he got hurt, and then their season fell apart. They actually were in a good spot and looked like the favorites to win the NFC East midway through the year, and then they fell apart. Smith got hurt. But I still consider this year a disappointment for the Redskins because a lot of their other players didn't improve, and their young defense showed signs, but nobody really truly broke out. So I'd say their season's a failure because like the Giants, they thought they were a playoff team before the year. 24 is the Detroit Lions. They're a failure to me. Matt Patricia in year one, they went 6-10. Matthew Stafford had the worst year of his career. 23, Jacksonville Jaguars. Here's the biggest failure on the list so far to me. To me, the big reason why they were a failure is because of Blake Bortles. Blake Bortles was the reason why I didn't pick them to make the playoffs before the season. I thought that he was a bit of a flash in the pan last year and actually was his good defense and Leonard Fournette masked him a little bit. If they get a quarterback upgrade, then look out in the AFC South. You could have potentially 4 good teams in that division if Jacksonville makes a quarterback upgrade. And then their defense, there's some guys that are going to be free agents that they have to take care of as well. Let's say that's a failure. 22, the Denver Broncos. I think their season was a failure too. They started off slow. They came back and made themselves interesting in the AFC playoff mix. Let's say they're a failure because I think they thought they were a playoff team before the year. They passed on a quarterback and took a good player in Bradley Chubb. It's not the Saquon Barkley argument per se, but it's more the Myles Garrett argument rather than the Saquon Barkley argument because it's a pass rusher instead of a transcendent offensive player. The Broncos should be looking for a quarterback in the draft this year. And obviously their failure season led to the firing of Vance Joseph. 21, the San Francisco 49ers. This is tough for me. You could argue they get a complete free pass and just give him an incomplete because of the injury to Jimmy Garoppolo. But I'd say failure only because Kyle Shanahan was thought out to be a good coach. But he's, very quietly has a very poor record. And next year is put up or shut up for Kyle Shanahan. Yeah, his quarterback needs to be healthy. Nick Mullins showed some promise, but there are other weeks that people say, oh yeah, that's Nick Mullins. But I'd say their season's a failure, but not a huge one because of the Garoppolo injury. I'd say a slight failure for the 49ers. Here's a monster failure, number 20, the Green Bay Packers. Everybody thought this was a playoff team before the year. I did not, but a lot of people did in the media, and people thought this was a playoff lock. I did not, only because I wasn't sold on their defense, and I wasn't sold on Jimmy Graham being the guy that people thought he was, and I was proven right on both those parts. Aaron Rodgers wasn't healthy most of the year, I get it, but still. They went 6-10, I think, this year, or 6-9-1, or 7-8-1, or whatever they went. And they really should be ashamed of themselves. Losing at home to the Cardinals like they did, that was just plain awful. And that cost Mike McCarthy his job. And they have a new coach coming in, and it'll be interesting to see how he does. It's the Titans' old offensive coordinator. Can't think of the name on top of my head. Another big failure on the list, number 19, the Atlanta Falcons. I had this team penciled in as a playoff team before the year. They have talent on both sides of the ball. Matt Ryan had a good statistical season, but it wasn't really that great of a year if you're watching it closely. Dan Quinn's another coach that doesn't look like a great coach. He took them to the Super Bowl one year and hasn't done anything other than that. You could make a case they should have beaten the Eagles in the second round in 2017, in that playoff year. And say if they did, they would have faced off the Vikings, and maybe they beat Minnesota, and they're in back-to-back Super Bowls, and we look at Dan Quinn differently. But Dan Quinn is somebody that I think is going into next year under some pressure. Number 18 is the Cincinnati Bengals. I'd say they're a failure. They got off to a good start, and then they fell apart. Andy Dalton got hurt, and that's a big reason why that team took a step back in the second half of the season. They have aging guys on defense. Marvin Lewis finally gone. Zach Taylor is their new coach. I'm interested to see what that team looks like next year. The biggest failure on the list thus far, or the biggest two failures on the list are coming up. One of them is the next team I'm going to talk about, and in a couple more ways, the other one. Number 17 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. What a failure of a season for that team. They didn't even make the playoffs as an AFC wild card. Yeah, they were mathematically alive for the division in Week 17, but they needed a win and a Ravens loss to the Browns. But the Steelers beat the Bengals, but the Ravens beat the Browns, so the Ravens get that division title. And the Steelers lost a bunch of games down the stretch. Mike Tomlin's still their head coach. That's what happens when you have a Super Bowl. But you haven't won a Super Bowl in a decade. Like, are they the only team with a championship head coach that still has a job that hasn't won one in over a decade? Even the Yankees got rid of Joe Girardi. I'm talking about in all sports now. Even the Yankees got rid of Joe Girardi 8 years after a championship. The Giants got rid of Tom Coughlin. The Packers got rid of Mike McCarthy. And McCarthy and Coughlin won some more recently than Tomlin. And both of those guys have been fired. Gary Kubiak with the Broncos. Oh, wait, John Fox. That team lost to Seattle. I mean, Gary Kubiak retired, but I guess that's different. There's another one that, John Harbaugh almost lost his job, but he saved his job by taking his team to the playoffs this year. But there's so many coaches in sports, and particularly the NFL, that have lost their jobs after winning Super Bowls, and some of them more recently than Mike Tomlin. Like the Steelers, I think, could have used a new voice. But they love them some Mike Tomlin. And that team is facing major turmoil and decisions with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. Fascinating to see what that team does. And that said, number 16 is the Tennessee Titans. I say this team's season was a failure. They had a chance to steal the last playoff spot in Week 17 of the year. Granted, Marcus Mariota was hurt most of the year, but they had other opportunities to steal games in which they didn't and could have been in the playoffs over Indy. But Indy deserved it over them, and that's credit to Indy, but Tennessee had opportunities to take that last playoff spot. So I'd say they're a failure, and then Marcus Mariota didn't improve. That's the other reason why. 15, the Carolina Panthers, failure. That team fell apart at the end of the year. They lost a bunch of games in a row. They were 6-2, and then they lost 7 straight, and they finished the year 7-9. They won in Week 17 in a meaningless game against the Saints in the Superdome with Teddy Bridgewater starting for New Orleans in that game. But that was just an awful collapse. Cam Newton had a shoulder problem, so that explains why for their collapse. But that's a talented team and shouldn't have been sitting at home in January. Here's the other big failure along with the Steelers, but to me the biggest failure in the NFC, and that's number 14, the Minnesota Vikings. You overpaid for Kirk Cousins, and you have a lot of talent around them, a couple good running backs, a couple good wide receivers, a great tight end. You have one weakness, that's the offensive line. You got to fix that. Their defense is excellent in all the separate units, whether it's linebackers, pass rush, interior, and secondary. But the offensive line was a big issue, and Cousins did not have a great year at all, did not live up to the contract. But maybe they upgrade the offensive line in free agency or via trade or in the draft, and Cousins has a better year, and the Vikings end up being the playoff team. Then that contract looks a little better. But this was supposed to be a Super Bowl contender before the year, and did not live up to it at all. And I keep saying that this was probably the most disappointing team in the league, because a lot of people thought that this team could have won the Super Bowl back in August. Number 13. Dare I say it? There, I'm doing it. The Cleveland Browns. Yes, the Cleveland Browns. Their season was a smashing success. Yeah, they went 7-8-1. They should have went 8-8 because they tied in Week 1 against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh should have really went 9-7. Cleveland had a great year. Baker Mayfield this franchise so much hope. They were dead right with their number 1 overall pick. A lot of people said that they should have taken Sam Darnold or Saquon Barkley, but no, they go with a risk in Baker Mayfield, and that risk pulled off, and he was the best rookie quarterback in the league. I think he and Saquon Barkley are the best 2 rookies, and if anything, you could argue that Baker should have been the Rookie of the Year over Barkley, but I made my case for Barkley on the podcast yesterday. But Mayfield has given the Browns something to hang on to. But they've had a great year. I'd say their season's a success. Number 12 is the Baltimore Ravens. Another team that I think had a successful season is the Ravens. They found Lamar Jackson and found out that he's pretty good. Joe Flacco, I think, will be heading elsewhere, whether that's Jacksonville or somewhere. But he won't be a Raven next year. Time to move on from him. And Jackson gave this team a little bit of a jolt, and they stole the division from Pittsburgh. And they ended up hosting a playoff game, which they lost. But they lost to a better team in the Chargers. So I can't really fault the Ravens for that, even though the Ravens were favored in that playoff game. But I just felt that from the get-go that Vegas was wrong. I thought the Chargers should have been a favorite in that game in Baltimore. But the Ravens, to me, had a good season, and they have a lot to be proud of, especially with Jackson. Number 11 is the Houston Texans. To me, their season was a failure. This was my AFC pick to go to the Super Bowl, believe it or not, because I thought Watson would have an unbelievable comeback year. And I actually had Watson winning the MVP before the year. But Watson did make the Pro Bowl, but that was courtesy of one of the quarterbacks in the AFC dropping out. I think it was Rivers or Brady Watson that took one of those spots. But Watt bounced back and had a great year. Clowney might not be back for this team unless they franchise tag him or extend him, which I think they'll end up doing anyway. But I think the Texans season was a bit of a failure because I thought they'd be better than this. Number 10 is the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Cowboys had a successful season, although their coach is a lame duck now because the Cowboys chose not to extend his contract. Dak Prescott, after the trade for Amari Cooper, showed a lot of signs of improvement. And I think that they'll end up paying Prescott and they'll pay Elliott. Cooper's somebody that they should keep because they gave up a first-round pick for. I'm interested to see what they do. DeMarcus Lawrence is a free agent. So this team's under a bit of pressure in the offseason. I think the NFC East as a whole is under the most pressure in the offseason. Like I said, the Giants need to replace Eli Manning. The Redskins, let's be honest, have to replace Alex Smith. The Cowboys conceivably have to pay 4 guys if they want to be a contender. And I should say a long-term contender. They have to pay 4 guys. I'm talking about Prescott, Elliott, Cooper, and DeMarcus Lawrence. They got to keep DeMarcus Lawrence unless you replace him in the draft or in free agency by somebody else. And then the Eagles, what's the pressure with them? Wentz or Foles? You could argue all these teams for most pressure in the NFC East, but my case is the Giants because of Eli Manning being washed up. But you could also argue Philly because they're clearly better with Foles than Wentz. But I don't think they'll trade Wentz because I really think they're high on him and they think that Foles is a bit of a flash in the pan. But to me, Foles is a flash in the pan outside of Philly. I just think Philly's perfect for Foles. And I'm very interested to see what they do. Number 9 is the Chicago Bears. I think their season was a very big success. Mitch Trubisky made the Pro Bowl and showed improvement in year 2. Matt Nagy proved to be a good hire. Khalil Mack, his presence on the defense, really gave that team a jolt. And they should be good for the next couple years. Number 8 is the Seattle Seahawks. I think their season was a success because nobody had them in the playoffs. There was a lot of people out there that had them finishing in last in the NFC West because I think people thought that the Cardinals were going to be a surprise team. I think I had them finishing in second because I wasn't high on San Francisco and Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think I had Seattle second, and I thought that Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll in that infrastructure would be worth a couple wins. And I was proven right, but I didn't think Seattle was a playoff team, but they deserve credit for making the playoffs. And probably could have won that game in Dallas if a couple things went their way. Number 7, the Philadelphia Eagles. I talked about it. Their season to me was a bit of a failure only because they were the reigning Super Bowl champions. At least get back to the Super Bowl. And they were the favorites to win the NFC East before the year. They didn't even win their division. The Cowboys did instead of them. And if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't fumble the ball, maybe Philadelphia's in the Super Bowl rather than the Rams. But I don't want to say their season was a big failure. I'd say it's more of a slim failure than a huge one because they made the second round and they came back from a pretty big deficit to make the playoffs, and they needed some help from the Vikings as well. Number 6 is the Indianapolis Colts. This team is about to be a contender for years to come. Andrew Luck, fantastic bounce-back season, won the Comeback Player of the Year award. Found some foundational pieces on both sides of the ball on the offensive line with Quentin Nelson, the guard, and Darius Leonard, the linebacker. Those two are keepers long-term. They have a lot of cap room. They can go out and get Antonio Brown or Le'Veon Bell if they want to. They have the 20-something pick in the draft. Maybe they use that on a defensive player, or they could use that as a trade chip potentially. But that team had a very good season. I'd say their season was a big success. Number 5 is the Los Angeles Chargers. Yeah, they went 12-4, but I think their season's a failure because I think a lot of people thought this was a Super Bowl caliber roster, and they got blown out in the playoff division loss against the Patriots. So I'd say their season's a bit of a failure. Not a huge one, but maybe a slim one. Number 4 is the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a tough one for me because they were not really supposed to be a division champion. Everybody had the Chargers as the team to beat in that division, and that's why I consider the Chargers season a bit of a failure because they didn't win their division, and they didn't go far in the playoffs like they were expected to. The Chiefs, I'm going to say their season was a success only because they were right about Patrick Mahomes. And the fact that he's a franchise quarterback, he's the best quarterback in the league right now, and that's why some sportsbooks have the Chiefs listed as the favorites to win next year's Super Bowl already. Number 3 is the Los Angeles Rams. Their season's a success because they made the Super Bowl. Number 2, the New Orleans Saints. Tough call. To me, they were a Super Bowl or bust before the year. I'm going to say that their season was a slim failure. It would have been a little bit of a bigger failure if the blown call didn't happen. I'd say they get a pass because of the blown call, so I'm going to say a slim failure only because they were Super Bowl or bust before the year, and they lost at home and blew a 13-0 lead to the Rams in the NFC Championship game, in the game where the Saints were a favorite in. Although, like I said, the bad call kind of gives the Saints a little bit of a free pass. And the number 1 is the Patriots. They're your new Super Bowl champions. Their season's a success because they won the Super Bowl. Enough said. Big news broke last night regarding the Oakland Raiders that they will be going to San Francisco and will be playing at Oracle Park, which is formerly known as AT&T Park, the home of the San Francisco Giants. So, I don't know if they will be the San Francisco Raiders for a year, or they'll be the Oakland Raiders playing in San Francisco. So that should be very interesting. I know they'll be playing in another baseball stadium. And at least they're not going to San Diego or Vegas really yet. Oakland fans can still travel to San Francisco. It's not far. So I'd say it's a minor win for Raiders fans. But it's a loss for the franchise because they're still playing in a baseball stadium. And that's just big random breaking news on the Super Bowl night after the game was played. Now we'll go to the other sports. We'll go with college basketball first, go over those scores, and look ahead to tonight's slate. Yesterday was a small slate because of the Super Bowl, obviously. Number 14, Villanova defeats Georgetown 77-65. Nova 18-4, Georgetown 14-8. Number 17, Purdue defeats Minnesota 73-63. Purdue 16-6, Minnesota 16-6. Clemson defeats Wake Forest 64-37. Clemson 13-8. Wake 8-13. Maine defeats New Hampshire 62-53. Maine 5-18. New Hampshire 3-18. Creighton defeats Xavier 76-54. Creighton 13-9. Xavier 11-12. Omaha defeats North Dakota 90-72. Omaha 13-9. North Dakota 9-14. Wright State defeats IUPUI 79-74. Wright State 13-11. IUPUI 14-10. Quinnipiac defeats Niagara 84-73. Quinnipiac 11-10. Niagara 11-12. UConn defeats East Carolina 76-52. UConn 13-9. East Carolina 9-12. South Dakota State defeats Denver 92-82. South Dakota State 19-6. Denver 7-16. UIC defeats Northern Kentucky 69-67. UIC 12-12. Northern Kentucky 18-6. And Stanford defeats Cal 84-81. Stanford 11-10. Cal 5-16. Tonight's slate, 7 o'clock on ESPN, you have number 16 Louisville at number 11 Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's favored by 4.5. Tough call. There's a legitimate case to be made for a Virginia Tech letdown after holding NC State to a whopping 24 points. Louisville has bounced back potential here after losing at home by double digits to North Carolina, in what was a revenge spot for Carolina. It's tough, but I'm going to take Virginia Tech to win, but Louisville to cover. How about that? And then I have a suggestion. I'd bet the under in that game, because Virginia Tech's defense is very good. Fairfield and Siena, Colgate and Lehigh, Marist and Canisius, NC Central and Florida A&M, South Carolina State and Delaware State at 7:30, NCAT and Bethune-Cookman, Savannah State and Maryland Eastern. 8 o'clock Fox Sports 1, Penn State at Northwestern. Northwestern's favored by 3.5. I think Western is going to win and cover. Penn State, I think, is the second worst team in the Big Ten. 8:30 Alabama A&M and Texas Southern, Arkansas Pine Bluff and Jackson State. Alabama State and Prairie View A&M. 9 o'clock ESPN 2. Number 17 Iowa State at Oklahoma. Iowa State's favored by 2.5. I think this is a trap game for the Cyclones, so give me the Sooners to bounce back from their bad loss at West Virginia to win this one at home. And speaking of West Virginia, they're at Texas Tech, 9 o'clock on ESPN. Texas Tech's favored by 11.5. I think Tech wins and covers. West Virginia's going to have a letdown after their win against Oklahoma. Northern Arizona at Eastern Washington. Montana State at Northern Colorado. ESPNU, Mississippi Valley State at Grambling. Grambling's favored by 11.5. This is a tough call for me. I am going to say that Grambling wins and Mississippi Valley State covers. I don't feel good about Valley State covering. I just don't think either of these teams are very good. And then at 10 o'clock, you have Southern Utah at Idaho. NBA, only 3 games on last night's slate, or yesterday afternoon slate, I should say. The Grizzlies defeat the Knicks 96-84 in a tankathon. The Grizzlies go to 21-33. New York drops to 10-42. They have the worst record in the league now. Mike Conley, 25 points, 8 boards, 7 assists. Marcus Gasol had 24 and 9 boards. Justin Holiday had 19 points, including 5 3-pointers. His trade value is going up. Jaren Jackson Jr., 16 points and 7 boards. Meanwhile, for New York, Kevin Knox had 17. DeAndre Jordan, his first game as a Knick, had 12 and 12. Luke Cornett off the bench had 11. Mario Hezonja off the bench had 14. The Celtics beat the Thunder 134-129 in what was a great game on ABC yesterday. Boston goes to 34-19. Thunder dropped to 33-19. Kyrie Irving had some big buckets in this game. 30 points and 11 assists. Marcus Smart had 18 with 7 assists. Al Horford had 17 with 9 boards. Or I'm sorry, that's 9 assists. My bad. Jason Tatum had 11 with 7 boards. Marcus Morris had 19 with 7 boards. Daniel Theis off the bench had 14. Terry Rozier off the bench had 10 with 7 boards. And Jaylen Brown off the bench had 12 with a couple big threes. Oklahoma City, Russell Westbrook, 22 points, 12 boards, 16 assists. Paul George had 37. Jeremy Grant had 15. Steven Adams had 16 with 9 boards. And Terrence Ferguson had 11. And off the bench, Dennis Schroeder had 16. The Raptors defeat the Clippers 121-103. Toronto improves to 38-16. Clippers drop to 29-25. Kawhi Leonard, 18 points. Serge Ibaka had 16 with 12 boards. Pascal Siakam had 15. Off the bench, DeLon Wright had 14. CJ Miles had 15. Meanwhile, for the Clippers, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had 19. Patrick Beverley had 12. Tobias Harris had 13. Montrezl Harrell had 10. Off the bench, Boban Marjanovic had 10. And Lou Williams had 18. Tonight's slate has 6 games. 7 o'clock, you have the Nuggets at the Pistons, the Hawks at the Wizards, NBA TV at 7:30, the Bucks at the Nets. 8 o'clock, the Pacers at the Pelicans. The Rockets at the Suns is 9 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock on NBA TV, you have the Spurs at the Kings. NHL, only 3 games yesterday. The Bruins beat the Capitals 1-0 on the game that was on NBC. The Bruins go to 28-17-7, big win for them. Washington drops to 28-18-6. Number 1 star of the game with 24 saves on 24 shots, Tuukka Rask. Number 2 star of the game with 38 saves on 39 shots, Braden Holtby. Number 3 star of the game with the lone goal of the game, David Krejci. The Canadiens defeat the Oilers 4-3 in overtime. 5 straight losses for the Oilers now. Montreal goes to 29-18-6. Edmonton drops to 23-24-5. Number 1 star of the game with a goal and an assist, Max Domi. Number 2 star of the game with 2 goals, Leon Draisaitl. Number 3 star of the game with a goal, Connor McDavid. The Flames defeat the Hurricanes 4-3 in Billy Peters' return to Carolina. Calgary goes to 34-14-5. Carolina drops to 25-21-6. Number 1 star of the game with 34 saves on 37 shots, David Rittich. The number 2 star of the game with a goal and assist, Teuvo Teravainen. Number 3 star of the game with the goal and an assist, Derek Ryan. Only 4 games tonight in the National Hockey League. 7 o'clock, the Kings at the Rangers, the Ducks at the Maple Leafs, the Canucks at the Flyers, and at 8:30, the Coyotes at the Stars. So no nationally televised games tonight in hockey. Now I'm going to go to my best bet, brought to you by DraftKings. Texas Southern, Grambling State, Texas Tech, the Rockets, the Maple Leafs. In tennis, Joe Wilfried Tsonga and Jeremy Chardy. And in soccer, Liverpool, plus 442 with the payout of $5.53. That's it for the podcast today. I'll be back tomorrow recapping the college hoops, NBA, and NHL. Look ahead to tomorrow's games. Talk more about the NFL and Super Bowl fallout and whatnot. Maybe I'll have another activity in store. I haven't decided on what yet. And obviously, my best bet. Hopefully you guys have a great day, everybody.